So in today's video, we're going to be doing a sub and sew photo blanket from scratch. So if you want to see how to do it, just keep watching. If you're new to my channel, my name is Leslie. My channel is all about crafting on a budget. I do mostly sublimation and Cricut videos, but I also do sewing videos. So if any of those things interest you, please consider subscribing, joining my YouTube family, and let's just jump into this video. So for this project, you're gonna need your photos. I just did mine. You can decide what size you want to make them. I just did mine 8.5 by 11, so just filling up papers. Obviously when you print it, it's going to be a little bit smaller than 8.5 by 11. You need some heat tape and some butcher paper, some fabric scissors or a rotary cutter. I highly recommend a rotary cutter, especially this one. I love this one more than like one like this. Like these are just, I don't know, it's not bad, but this one just makes it so much easier to cut. So I really recommend a rotary cutter over fabric scissors. But if you don't have a big enough space to cut your blanket, you're probably gonna need fabric scissors. You're gonna need some no-pill fleece. This one's from Joann's. And I say this all the time, if you're gonna buy this, buy it when it's on sale. Because full price, it's like $14 a yard, $13 a yard, which is a lot of money. It adds up. So I recommend to do it when they have it on sale. And when they do, it's about, sometimes it's like $5.99 a yard or $7.99 a yard, which is so much better than paying full price for it. And then you're gonna need some sort of backing. So this is up to you what you want the backing to be. You can use minky fabric with the dots or minky fabric that's just plush. You can use flannel if you want to use flannel. It is completely up to you. This one is from Walmart. It's pretty inexpensive. It's about, I think, $10 for the yard of it. You're also going to need some clips or pins to prepare your blanket where you're sewing, and also like a chopstick comes in handy for poking out those corners once you flip it inside out, and some pinking shears come in handy to kind of trim your edges after you have sewn it. You're gonna need your sewing machine, some thread. The size that you're gonna make it is completely up to you. I'm gonna do a small size, so I'm doing about 30 by 36. So I cut about 31 by 36. Just to account for seam allowance and if it shrinks, anything like that. I don't have enough minky fabrics to fit the 31 by 36, so I might cut my fabric a little bit smaller just to match what I have left in minky. So we're gonna start off by prepping our fabric. One side is very like, can you see that? It's like furry almost, and the other side isn't. The other side is what you're gonna be subbing on. And we're gonna do this little by little so that we don't create ghosting. And we're gonna start off by lint rolling, which is gonna be super important. So we're gonna lint roll the way that it's going. If you go the other way, you should be able to tell which way is the wrong way, because it kind of lifts up in that area. Lint roll really good. And because you're working with fleece, you're probably gonna have to use a bunch of sheets as you're doing this, especially if you have a big blanket. And you can definitely like add a background color to your blanket. Like, get creative, do what you want to do with it. You can do a collage, whatever. You can add, you know, a floral background or whatever you want to do with it. I'm just gonna have a white background. So now we're just going to start taking our pictures. And we're just going to, I'm gonna do one by one or whatever fits on my heat press. I think maybe just one fits on there, maybe two, I'm not sure. But make sure wherever you start your picture that you are taking into account seam allowance. You wanna give yourself some room for seam allowance. You could kind of display everything just to kind of get more or less an idea of where you wanna put things. So once you kind of figured out where you want it to be, you can put on your tape dispenser as a weight so that it doesn't shift, and then just tape it down. And because this is fleece, I'm going to tape it down really good so that it doesn't shift. Okay, so I just taped down my whole first row. We'll see how much I can fit on my heat press, but let's move to the heat press to press this first. Okay, so let's see how many we can fit on here at once. So I think I can fit 2 whole ones. So I don't need butcher paper, so I'm just going to put a Teflon sheet just to protect my, like the fleece and stuff from the heat a little bit. And I'm gonna press down. I'm using InnoSub, so I do 360 for 60 seconds. Look at your paper so that you can determine what heat setting you need to use. You might have to do, if your heat press runs hot, maybe like 385 for 60 seconds. But normally you would do 400 degrees for 60 seconds, sorry. It just really depends what type of paper you're using. So now I'm just gonna use my heat gloves, take off my Teflon sheet. I did not. So now I'm just gonna lift up my paper. And that's how much ink release I have. I'm gonna lift up my other paper. Perfect. They look great. So now I'm just gonna shift my blanket. And I'm gonna just put that one that I have left in this row, making sure that my other one is off of my heat press so that there's no ghosting or anything like that. On the Teflon sheet again. And by the way, the reason why I don't need butcher paper is because my paper doesn't really require butcher paper. Nothing comes through it. Okay, I'm gonna take off the Teflon sheet again. And I'm gonna take off the paper. Good ink release. If you find that you have some lint, I find it like if you just like use your hands and kind of wipe off the lint right away, then it kind of just goes away. Let's move on to our second row. So now we're just gonna start on the second row. You wanna make sure you lint roll. Okay, so now that we have it all subbed, we're going to get our minky fabric. So we're gonna line them up pretty sides together. And what that means is just the right sides of the fabric. You're gonna line them up, and then you're gonna take your clips and you're gonna start just clipping them all the way around. And because you're using minky fabric, if you are using minky fabric, I would say to just use more clips than you normally would, because this thing shifts and stuff when you sew, so you just wanna be careful. It doesn't matter if your minky goes past your plush, because once you sew it and then you trim it, like it's gonna be even. So don't worry too much about that. So now we're gonna start sewing. I'm gonna use a 1/4 seam allowance foot. It just has this little kind of like guide right here where your fabric will stop, and it'll make it easy. If your sewing machine cannot go through thick layers very easily, I would say use a walking foot. A walking foot is gonna help all the layers go evenly, and it's just gonna be easier for you. My sewing machine won't have any trouble sewing this up, so I'm not gonna use a walking foot. Make sure that when you're sewing, you leave an opening of maybe like 3 inches, because this is pretty big. You can mark it. I'm gonna sew with my fleece on the bottom. That way it glides easier than the minky fabric, and then I can kind of pay attention to what the minky fabric is doing. So I'm just gonna lift my presser foot, put it on the line that I drew, indicating one of the stop marks. I'm gonna make sure to back stitch at the beginning and end. That's super important. You don't want your stitches to come undone when you're flipping it. So make sure to back stitch to secure your start and end. And then take your pins or clips as you go. And just start sewing all the way around. Making sure that you're paying attention to both layers and shifting them as needed. And again, we're sewing at a 1/4 seam allowance. As you're getting to a corner, you want to make sure to pivot. So make sure to stop whatever your seam allowance is. If you're doing a 1/4 seam allowance like we are, we're going to stop 1/4 from the corner, and you can just eyeball it. And if you're too scared to go past it, you can hand crank it till you get to where you think you should be. And then you're gonna flip it up while still leaving your needle down. My sewing machine automatically stops with the needle down. Some sewing machines do not. So make sure that your needle is down, and then turn your fabric, put your presser foot back down, and then keep sewing. And this is just going to give you a nice corner. And you can use your hands to guide it. So you can use one in the back to kind of hold it and guide it, and then one in the front to kind of control your layers. When you get back to that other line you drew to mark your gap, make sure you backstitch. That's just going to help make sure that when you're flipping it, those stitches don't rip out. Make sure to take out all your pins and clips if you have any left in there. Now you can take your pinking shears, and you've seen this in previous videos, but you're going to take it and you're just going to trim off your excess. And you can start where the opening is. Make sure you don't trim where this opening is, because we're going to need all that extra fabric to flip it, to kind of top stitch it. So what I do is I'll take my pinking shears and I'll kind of just start behind that line. And make sure you get as close as you can to the stitch line. If you don't have pinking shears, you can definitely just use scissors. Pinking shears is just going to help with any possible fraying. So just trim it all the way around. When you're getting back to to the gap, what I like to do is take my scissors, my pinking shears, and then I just like to kind of just turn it up like that. And now you can take your blanket and you can take the furthest corner and just put that through the hole. And if your hole is big enough, everything should just come out really easily. So mine is probably about 6 inches, I would say. And then make sure that you poke out those corners. You can take like a chopstick or something like that and poke out the corners if you want. Or you can just use your fingers. Now what you're gonna do is you're gonna take where that opening is, you're gonna take your fingers on the sides here, you're gonna kind of pull, and it will start to roll over on it. And then you can just take a clip and you can start clipping that all the way across. And when you top stitch this, you shouldn't be able to tell where that opening was. So what I like to do, not everyone does this, but I like to kind of just roll and clip all the way around, just so that I'm making sure that I'm top stitching it nicely. Just kind of rolling it back and forth, making sure it sits nicely. Okay, so now we're gonna top stitch. I'm gonna use a top stitching foot. Make sure that whatever seam allowance you use for this is smaller than your gap. I'm gonna do a 1/8. That's what I find best. So make sure to backstitch at the beginning and end. You can start with your opening if you want. Take out your clips as you go. Make sure you're paying attention. You could use a coordinating thread, like, you know, like I have purple here, purple, you know, on the top and white on the bottom, whatever. But I honestly don't mind it just being all white. It's totally up to you. Once you get to 1/8 or whatever seam allowance you're using from the corner, we're going to pivot just like we did earlier. And then we're going to keep sewing. Make sure to backstitch at the end. I think it turned out really cute, and I think it was a good idea to just do row by row because there wasn't any ghosting at all. Like, I didn't get any ghosting at all. Another thing I wanted to mention is that pins come really in handy when you're, you know, kind of putting together your minky blanket so that it doesn't move. So I definitely recommend using pins. I use pins and clips, and I think that's super handy. And you can definitely get creative with it. Like, I love how it turned out. It's really cute. My daughter loves it. It's mostly for her. But let me know if you guys try this. Let me know what kind of designs you wanted to do. I just wanted to do just a basic one just to start. It's just for my daughter. It's like a little memory blanket. And it's perfect. And yeah. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for supporting my channel. I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye guys.